Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure seeing you here today. There's a queue at the registration, so people might come in now and then. Please don't feel disturbed by that. It's a pleasure seeing you all. My name is Peter Schniering. I'm founder of Future Clean Tech Architects, and we are co-host of the UNIDO Global Call and the events this afternoon.
Yeah, welcome everyone also to this event. It's nice to have you here. My name is Vanessa Völkel and I'm the Deputy Head of the UNIDO Investment and Technology Promotion Office in Bonn. And together with FCA we are co-hosting this event, and tonight with Peter we will facilitate the award ceremony. So welcome.
We have guests even here today. This was the first panel that was sold out, if you like. So really after one day. So we actually had to tell a couple of people, no, you can't make it, and they'll be angry if there remains one seat left. So I hope that those who booked the seats will come. But just looking at the audience, we have participants today from all walks of life. We've got entrepreneurs, we've got the investment sector, we've got the United Nations, we've got people from academia, researchers, organizations that work on, well, getting the energy transition done. And we are very pleased to have this exceptional panel, as we think, and especially that everyone we asked said, I'm coming right away. And that the topic of today is breakthrough innovation. So it's how can we foster innovation within organizations, within countries, within systems of cooperation. And this venue of the public library is pretty nice for this, because this is a place, of course, of exchange of ideas, of fresh ideas that are soaked up via books and other means. So I will not introduce them all. They will do it themselves, or our moderator will do it, but I would like to say a couple of words on the moderator. We're pleased to have Dr. Till Stenzel of Set Ventures and Funkelfeuer, one of the best company names I've ever come across, who are working on decarbonizing companies, including emissions-intensive companies. And I've known Till for a long time. We met in, I think, 2005 or so at the International Energy Agency in Paris, and have been collaborating ever since. He has an impressive track record both in the investment world. He's been with E.ON in-house consulting, just as Patrick Carter, the managing director who's here with us today, is still. He knows both the technology side and the financial or the investment side. And I would, without further ado, give the word to Till, and thank you all for coming today. And the last thing I want to say is, as you know, because there was so much interest, we have a tight schedule. So I'm asking our panelists, and I've taken 7 minutes already because we started a little earlier. Please try to be done within 1 hour. So like 5 past or 10 past 3, that would be great. So you might be able to make it to the second panel, which starts afterwards. Vanessa and I will have to apologize at some point because we're still preparing the main event at 5 o'clock in the theater. Thank you so much all for coming, and thank you for spending the time.
Well, thank you, Peter, and first of all, the thanks go all back to you again for organizing the day, organizing this panel. So it's great always to collaborate with you, and happy to moderate this panel today. So we are going to discuss about breakthrough innovation, and as the name suggests, when we talk about breakthrough innovation, this is not your everyday incremental small-scale improvements that hopefully all of us that work in corporations, in public life, aim for, strive for, even in our personal lives. When you talk about breakthrough innovation, you think of radical, transformative. These are sort of the words that probably come to mind. But of course, as the name suggests, for breaking through, you need to break through something. So what is it that we need to break through here? It's of course something existing, be it corporate structures, be it market practices, be it other technologies that we want to replace. So I think these are some of the themes that we can touch on today, and that provide the context for the topic today of how we can foster breakthrough innovations. So we will kick off the whole day today, and it's really a day of really interesting events here in Remscheid with this panel. And we've got 3 very distinguished speakers. I will just briefly introduce you and then ask each of you to briefly outline a little bit more about your background. So we have Mr. Andy Fuchs from the Toyota Mobility Foundation, long distinguished career in the automotive sector, especially with Toyota in different countries, in different parts of the world really. We have Nadine Michalske, a communications expert, but now recently a startup entrepreneur in your second venture, as I now already learned, focusing exclusively now on transparency in climate change and in corporate carbon footprinting. And we have Patrick Carter, who has been in strategy consulting probably close to 15 years now, and probably had the best front row view that you could have of the energy transition, because Patrick was really instrumental in all of the changes that we've seen at E.ON, one of the largest, world's largest energy corporations, and he's been working very closely with the management there. So each of you, maybe if you could just briefly introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can jump into the topic.
Then I start, yeah.
Ladies first.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Nadine Michalske, co-founder. So we have two founders of Klimametrics. And yeah, we started, I think, almost exactly 2 years ago only. And what we wanted to do is, so our background is technology. We were developing technology for different kind of startups or digital products before, my co-founder and me. And by that time, we said we really want to contribute and not only do the next platform in something, but want to do something that's makes or solves one of the larger problems of the world. And so we were looking at the climate change problems around why is it not moving, and why is it not moving forward? And what we found out that the transparency is lacking. So many companies really have problems to find out where their emissions are coming from and how large they are and so on. So we were really astonished because there's so much data in these companies. Why don't they know that? So, and with this kind of background, we started to develop a software that takes the existing data in companies, like the different IT systems, drag the data out and use that for the calculation of the carbon footprint, for reporting reasons, for reduction evaluation and controlling. Genau.
Thanks, Andy. So, Till, what to add? I think when I joined Roland Berger back then in a consultancy and then E.ON, I wasn't aware of how much I'm going to be part of this transformation. So I've seen the whole corporate world in utility sector, from expansion to merging to restructuring to growth and expansion and restructuring again. And I'm happy to provide some of the insights and learnings, at least I drew from all of those corporate transformations. And of course, thanks to Peter and Vanessa being invited here. It doesn't take a second to say, I'm going to be part of this. And looking forward to the questions you bring across.
Yeah, I'm representing the dinosaur industry, automotive. Andy Fuchs, all my professional life in automotive, with German companies, now for over 20 years with a Japanese company that is quite known for something what has to do with transformation. That's the first generation Prius. And just looking back the last maybe 15 years, I've been very much involved in the transition of the energy with the Clean Energy Partnership from the Berlin office before I was moving on now the last 4 years into the Toyota Mobility Foundation, which is founded by Akio Toyoda himself to give something back to society. So here we're trialing, I would say, what hopefully will be the future.
Fantastic. All right, thanks a lot. Patrick, maybe let's start on this topic of the transition that we've witnessed in the energy industry. And I wanted to ask you, when you look at E.ON and the steps you've taken over the last decade almost now, how much of this was driven by really technological changes and how much was really policy an input here that drove some of the changes that we witnessed there?
You start with the difficult one. see where this is going. Well, that's tough to say, honestly. I think when we look back at E.ON, let's take 10 years ago, that was rather pushed by fundamental drivers coming from oil prices and gas and stuff. So I wouldn't say that was driven by regulation. Most of the things have been driven by customers and markets, and usually regulation followed afterwards, as we also see now regulation on energy networks, which is adjusting to the new digital world. And in some instances, I would even say we pushed regulation. Yeah? So when we look over, when we spun off Uniper, we made clear that it's only focused on the new, rather green energy world. That also forced policymakers to take the nuclear issue quite serious. Because up to then we debated it decades and decades. And afterwards, when liability really come to the surface, then they acted and concluded contracts. So I rather would say it's markets and customers. It's less regulation from my point of view.
And when you say you pushed regulation sometimes, are policymakers able to always keep up with what's going on in terms of changes and transitions? Or what kind of pushes do they need?
I think it's not about pushing them or pulling them into a certain way. I think it needs an open exchange on the learnings and the views on what's going to happen to markets. I think they're all smart people and they need to balance lots of different interests of so many different stakeholder groups. So, and I understand and also see that they're doing this with good intent. The question is rather, do we have an open dialogue and do we have really the different faculties and functions at table which have the feeling they can contribute? And at times I feel that industry falls short and at times regulation falls short in this expertise. And I think that's something we need to arrange. The problems are too complex that you can drive them from one company or one department of the public agency.
Nadine, maybe to bring you in here, what is driving your customers to dig into this transparency and become more open about it? What do you see as the key drivers?
Regulation, first of all. Really, but this is actually only one part. So, of course, you have the non-financial reporting obligation for some companies, but it's getting reworked, so it's getting a bit more tighter and stricter, and I think it will be, in my view, improve a bit. But that was still very open. But I think what I can see is that we have a very interesting kind of pressure path, which is coming from a market that I didn't actually expect it when I started all of this, coming from the financial market. Yeah? So investors are looking, they have the long-term perspective, because companies just look at the next or maybe the second year or the third year after the current one, and to see how they tackle the current problems and challenges. But investors, of course, they have the long-term view. We want to get the money back after 10, 20, 30 years. And so they are looking at, okay, what kind of regulation might come up in the future? and is this company prepared? Yeah, so do they have a long-term view on that? And so, I don't know, there's this standard that they developed, this, I think TCFD or something like this, that is focusing on. It's a standard that shows how to report climate-related risks and chances and how that is affecting the financials currently and in future. And this I found very interesting, so that they developed this climate risk reporting standard for companies. And we were then also looking deeper at that. What are the climate risks and climate chances? So apart from the physical risks, so it's about transitional risks. And it was about, like, is this company stable enough in 10 years? Yeah, does it have products on the market that can still be sold? What is about the carbon price? Do they take that into account? Do they know how they will have a different cost structure compared to their competitors if they take that into account? And do they calculate the scenarios and all of this? And what we saw is that not that many companies do that yet. I mean, the large ones, of course, they have like strategic departments, they look at all these things, but especially like the middle large companies in Germany, for them it was really like, okay, sustainability is not only a PR thing or marketing thing, it's a strategic topic. And that was something that I found very interesting, that nobody was really, or not nobody, but many companies were not really aware of that. And especially not the people working for sustainability. But what we see now is that the pressure coming from the financial market to the large companies who are having the long-term view, who are now publishing their announcements, their climate goals, etc., that they put pressure on their supply chain. Mm-hmm. And now you can see that in the companies behind, they are asking for, okay, I need to have my carbon footprint now, and not only my carbon footprint, I need to know also how to reduce that until 2030 or whenever. And this is where we see that the companies really are now starting to deal with that. So coming from the market again.
I think this point is very relevant, especially when we look here in Remscheid and around here, where of course a lot of suppliers to the big companies, for example in the automotive sector, are based, and obviously it's as much relevant in Remscheid as it is in New York or in Berlin to look at this issue.
Maybe even more here, actually. Yeah.
But I mean, on this note, I mean, it obviously it sounds very much common sense, and to some extent you could say, you know, business as usual is not an option. This is the new normal in a way. But what is holding back clients? What do you see as sort of key obstacles, or what is making people hold off on this?
I would say typical corporate problems. We have done that all the time, and we are very risk averse. I mean, in corporates anyway, and in Germany especially. And so, yeah, I think, I mean, if you look at it from our perspective, like working with a small startup, we are now 15 people. Oh my God. So what happens when the founder dies? Yeah, so is the solution that I just bought then broken? Yeah, high risk. And or do you have everything at hand? So what you need to do if you work as a startup with corporates is not only to develop your solution, you need to kind of develop a, let's say, corporate readiness solution on top of it. Which means you need to have the right people who you can deal all these large stakeholder projects, yeah, and steer that come somehow through there, and so on. So it's really difficult. It's not easy to work with corporates. Yeah, you need to know how the IT infrastructure is, all these safety issues, to have documentation in place, that everybody could send something to the legal department, to the IT department, so they feel safe. This is something you really have to take into account. It's not about only creating or developing the solution. It's about helping them to apply that in their corporate. And I think this is the thing that corporates need to deal with. So how can they be more open to innovation that is coming from outside? How can make the people less risk averse? I mean, I have ideas, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe they have.
Andy, maybe this is a good moment to bring you in. Toyota historically has been known to be a very stable and maybe risk-averse company, but I think we just talked about this before the panel. You recently made some announcement for really some very large, I wouldn't call it bets, but large investments that Toyota is making in battery cars. How do you see the culture changing at Toyota in this regard?
I don't see the culture changing at all.
Okay.
Maybe also to refer just what was said. I think the financial sector has a very significant impact on all industry in general. But what you ask now, and I said, did the strategy change? And I can talk about it as I worked for a German OEM, and now I have the Japanese OEM, and can compare a little bit. And maybe the uniqueness in our case now with Toyota is, it sounds strange now because we are a share-listed company, but it's still the grandson of the founder is running the business. So you apply a much longer-term vision to your strategies, and what we describe here in Germany, a farmer business in a way. A farmer is always thinking in generation, and it might be also something with the Japanese mentality, which I cannot explain in detail, but you have buildings that are centuries old and they're built to age. So when we introduced in '97 first generation of electrified vehicles, it was not new, because initially Porsche came up with the idea much, much earlier, just never managed to get a commercial viable product out of it. And at that time, a Toyota as well was challenging his engineers and said, well, I want to leave a legacy, because when you have, quotation, family business, you think in longer terms. And if you see today with Akio Toyoda, my current boss, he still lives what his grandfather gave him basically into the business, a long-term orientation, and therefore all our efforts never changed. I know in the press there's a lot, oh, Toyota pulled the plug of electromobility when we were not starting. But if you look at it, till today, since 1997, we have sold 18 million electrified vehicles. And our battery strategy, for example, is following, and this is what is very relevant, and the partners are sitting here, it doesn't help us to have battery electric vehicles and a bad non-decarbonized grid.
Yeah.
Because then it's better to run with a fuel-efficient petrol vehicle. So both has to come in cooperation, and the announcement you see now is just a clear demonstration that we're moving on, because we see the limitations we have on battery production, because obviously the market is developing, because like Europe is pushing very hard for decarbonizing the electric grid, and therefore it makes sense to come with these vehicles. But if you go in other markets in Asia, South America, or wherever, where you have a dirty grid, it doesn't make sense. So therefore, we run a strategy that is local, but looking at global production figures, and that is really rooting back to the foundation of this company, where there was always the dream to have a battery electric vehicle, but we never could get it together with the context that is mandatory. And finally, we are at the stage, and that makes me very optimistic. It's not only that Toyota is pushing for that, we have many players that all work at the same thing, but not only as OEMs, but the energy companies, society in general, and that brings it together.
I would challenge you maybe a little bit on this point, as much as I believe that this long-term vision is admirable at Toyota, but of course, the car industry got disrupted by what I would call a bit the startup mentality of a certain Elon Musk. And although, of course, he doesn't single-handedly change the entire industry, isn't it sometimes necessary that you need to inject a bit of this sort of startup culture into an industry to really shake things up and change the trajectory that you're taking?
You haven't met my boss yet. I can tell you he's challenging the company on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And obviously, yes, we employ 300,000 people globally, and bringing a startup mentality in takes change. Yep. And this change we live on a daily basis. But just to remind you, we were amongst the first investors in Tesla. So we were believing in change. Now in 2014, in 2018, Accu decided, Accu Toyota, to start the Toyota Mobility Foundation. And my job is now here in Europe and Africa to look for startups to work together to solve the problems of the future. So we're trying also, not internally, also externally, to come up with new solutions and get out of just the big company, go to the small startups, go on the market and really trial. Because we believe the time is now. We have to act. And that's what we want to do. And this is what we encourage. And our latest project, you might have read about it, we're building a future city, woven city in Tokyo, close to Mount Fuji, close to Toyota City, where we invite innovators and scientists to build the future of a city, what it should be to be fully decarbonized.
Patrick, maybe to come back to the transformation at E.ON, when we talk about breakthrough innovation, obviously everyone first thinks about technology and the changes, but it looks like culture is an important element of this whole innovation cycle as well. How much has E.ON's transformation been about cultural changes, about being more customer-centric? You talked about the market pushes. How much more has this really driven and changed at E.ON?
I think it has driven a lot. Are we there yet? No, I think not even close. Yeah? I think this level playing field as a corporate with the customers and with the partners is something that I would say the Elon Musk movement have changed. I think they don't change the corporates, but what they infuse in such markets that are rather mature is a different way of cooperation, which is needed, specifically if companies have focused a lot. Yeah? If you look 10 years back, companies have basically driven the full value chain of it. Yeah? And the logic was to lock in all the suppliers, lock in your advantage. In the world of today, where we're all individuals, yeah, it's about matching. It's basically, it's a kind of this matching play, yeah, which need to happen. And therefore you need all those partners. And it's not just customers, it's also suppliers, it's different industry players, it's entrepreneurs, startups, it's also the Greenpeace on the planet. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So, and I think that has changed a lot. Now, to what extent corporates need to change? Well, the key is that you need to handle both. So you need to make sure you have a stable, sorted business, because this is what at the end allows production at scale. So you can't get around this one. So at scale, you will not work as a startup at the end of the day. Now, on the other hand, you need to make sure you're still open enough to let's say, infuse all the changes, perspectives that are on table. And that's the tricky part. And this is where now E.ON, and also I heard now Toyota start to work lots of this venturing investments, but the key will be when do we decide a startup is ready to go mass scale? And second is, who goes mass scale with it? Because if you have those seeds investment of 7-8% each and 5 corporates in, that's the interesting part. So lots of corporates have not yet the partnering competence to accept that this is a profit sharing game. It's all my profit game. And that's something we need all to learn, and customers want part of it, but there's even more to it.
Nadine, you are a startup, basically.
Yeah.
What is for you the sort of do's and don'ts how can you make a corporate startup collaboration successful? What's the key ingredient from your sort of startup perspective there?
I mean, I have, of course, like a very specific perspective because we have a B2B customers, yeah. So we are working together with corporates, and so for us, of course, like this investment part doesn't really count that much, yeah. And but to work together, I mean, we do it now, I would say successfully, but it took us quite a long time to develop this layer, yeah, as I said, like the corporate readiness layer on top of the solution. And what I would say, I think, I completely understand. I mean, if you have such a large organization, you can't have a startup mentality. I mean, that is not possible. Yeah? Yeah. But to have like kind of more playing fields, a certain openness where you can apply something. So I don't know. Let's have something like a department that has like 10 pilot projects a year that they get financed, and they don't have to be successful with all of them. It's maybe a goal of have like 5 or 3 of them being successful, so that they are a bit more less risk averse to choose the topics and try something out. And then after the pilot, see, okay, is it a good team? Do I really trust them out, and to get them ready, to be corporate ready and help them maybe to develop that layer. So that would be something, for example, that I could see like from a startup that has corporates as customers. Yeah, so this would be super helpful, I think, because then both sides also would benefit, because the startup could really learn from how to apply that solution to the corporate, and the corporate could really has kind of a playing field that has some investment into new solutions, etc., but doesn't have a high risk of like wasting too much time or too much money and focusing on one solution. And also the startup doesn't has too much risk of focusing on corporates, because like the sales cycles are really annoying. So, yeah. And I think this would be like helpful to have like kind of playing fields where the people take the risk, and the risk but has like a certain frame, yeah? So it's not too much.
I think to some extent we also see big corporate collaboration being more and more sort of prominent. I think when we look especially at electric vehicles, of course utilities and car companies are suddenly partners where before they probably didn't even know what the other business was all about. Have you seen sort of at Toyota sort of changes here in terms of who you partner with, what type of projects you take on?
Absolutely. In the past, the life was so easy. There was this beautiful silo that was called mobility, and there was energy, and everything was with this magic oil and all that, and it was so easy. The future will be electric, and that means we have to change, because we all will work together. Because only in this context, working together as partners of various sectors, we will be moving along. Because without the right charging infrastructure, battery electric vehicles won't have a benefit. We are seen as a little bit controversial, also pushing for hydrogen. But we see also this is mandatory to decarbonize big industries. And therefore, from startup to big corporates amongst themselves, we have to cooperate, because no one will be able to tackle all the challenges we're facing. And one thing, if there are here maybe people that are in the financing sector and all that, I want to also a little bit support startups, as I'm dealing a lot with startups, because through the foundation we're helping to bring new ideas up. And so we're at a very, level 1-3, so really early stage, where you hear, yes, startups can find money at that stage. But when they come to just lift up before really it flies, this is the time where they need your help. We can do something, but we cannot support all. And I think startups need, especially in the time of the death valley, as you call it, of passing through, the support. And one startup told me, and I said, when we come up with these ideas, what we could do to help regions, for example, because we're working on regional projects to bring mobility to disabled people, to elderly, to decarbonize and all that, we hear quite a lot from regions or government, you never get fired hiring IBM. And that's the problem. But if you're a 15-person startup, it's hard for policymakers then to say, oh, I bet on them, because my voters obviously want a safe environment. And this is, I think, this is hindering us. And in the US, I see this risk business that I say, well, let's try it. And we don't have this mentality. And there, I think, here Europe has really chances, because we have great new startups out there with fresh ideas that really could spark up. But as corporates, and even if we have a foundation, and Siemens does, E.ON has one as well, we are not reaching out that widely as probably could be done.
Yeah, maybe there are
also the policymakers don't. I mean even more, I would say. Yeah.
And this is exactly, I think, a key point here. I mean, for me, when I look at it with my sort of investor hat on, one of my great frustrations has been, when you look at the electric mobility sector, and we take just Germany, I mean, we forecasted to have several million electric vehicles in the next couple of years on the road, maybe more, maybe less, independent of what the exact number is. When you just add up the batteries that are in each of these vehicles, this is very quickly more than the entire battery, the stationary battery fleet that we will see in Germany, in houses, in industry, or wherever. It's a phenomenal potential. Yet, when I look at it from an investor perspective, we've seen many times companies with great ideas how to link up these batteries, how to really exploit them for grid stability, opportunities for other sort of supporting services. But regulation is not there. There's no business case behind that yet that can fly. And this is sort of where regulation could make all the difference, besides all the other sort of technological sort of innovation that obviously has to come. Patrick, maybe on, or if you want to comment on that, or
this is absolutely right. I think something that we as a society need to sort is this: do we have a shared vision? Because all what we describe are all individual, or let's say smaller group problems. The thing is, policy is there to create and define, or let's say sketch out the rules of how a market should work. Now, if you don't know what the market is and who are the players in that market, what do you want to define? So at the end of the day, is we corporates know our world. Customers know what they can describe what they want, but do we all have a shared vision of how this looks like? What is this market in 10, 15 years, which is decarbonized? How does it look like? How does it feel? What are the solutions we need? And yet we are all playing in our own turf. And therefore policy is playing on turf, because there's some policymakers who deal with e-mobility, and then they take care of it. It needs to be big, it needs to be measurable, and then you come up to solutions. So we need to make sure we are open to different technologies. We need to make sure that policy is not linked to technology as a hardware. There's also software, and because we need to make sure that this hardware speaks to each other and does something with all those data. That has also something to do with data protection, because basically what the customers want is they are happy to give some data out if they see benefit from it, yet they don't even in a position to debate about it, because there's someone sitting there that defines what data is. So there's someone saying to this data is super important for you. Do you even know that person, but you say clear, that's what's important to you. And this we need to take care of. And therefore the whole industry, the customers and the partners are needed to sketch this out. Otherwise we don't get there at all. And hydrogen is the next one, which is around the corner. Without that visions, it's not going to get there.
Maybe just to answer also some of the concerns I fully share, because quite often we forget the customer. And these business models, technology, would allow us already today to use that fleet you described as a perfect buffer. But does the customer want it? Because we are still stuck in old customer models that everyone is buying a car, puts us in his beautiful garage, and particularly with Germans, we are to blame here. You see still, if you live in the countryside, a lot of people washing their car by hand every weekend. So this is apparently an emotional relationship we have with this. But if there is a benefit for people who say, maybe utility in the future will be the car dealer, because they use this fleet that's out there as a storage, and you pay for use. So the business models need to change where we might become a supplier to and nothing more. So the workbench for an electric company and all that. But obviously it needs regulation, it needs a mind change, and this is something we have to work together, because otherwise it won't work.
And maybe I want to pick up on something that Patrick mentioned here, because I think it's an important point about having a shared vision of where we are going here. I think it's hard enough in one country to really come down on where this should lead us. Now, if we take a global perspective, obviously there are a lot more than regional disparities also involved. And Andy, I know you are involved in projects, or Toyota Mobility Foundation in projects really with a global mandate. How do you see sort of the different regional approaches here to bringing these sort of new ideas and innovations to life?
Maybe I'm an optimist, but I think we never had the tools like today that really would help us to make an impact. To give one example from Africa, where we're working on two projects helping, first of all, to bring mobility to people that never had it, but bring clean mobility. Decentralized grids. In the future, unimaginable because for the cost. Today, you can produce clean solar energy for affordable cost in Africa. Obviously, if you scale, you have the economies of scale and the costs will further go down. But we have managed to bring people that never had in their life electricity. And around Lake Victoria, together with the Siemens Foundation, fishermen have more income while using clean energy to bring their ships out at nighttime and do the night fishing at Lake Victoria for those who've been there already, which I find is amazing. First of all, from the impact, there's no oil spillage. Secondly, they have more income, and it helps to develop Africa. We look to Asia, and we're working in Bangkok, how we can get the traffic out. We're working with public transport operators and see how we connect systems to bring their electric bicycles as the taxi, as a connection point. So we're working many areas, and really for the first time, to my knowledge, the costs are there that in the very near future, we will be there to make more business models that are sustainable, but currently, obviously, of the scale, we need still to support it, therefore foundations exist. But the business case is not too far away, and what I see is also what is encouraging. I see Africa, so many young people that have that vision, and I met in Rwanda a group of students that build an electric car. Don't look at it, it's probably not what a German would wash on a Saturday in his garage, but you know, the vision is there. People want to do it, and there is really the technology, and you can make it also from the cost, hopefully in the near future, a business model.
Nadine, I guess in some ways there's always this prejudice, this whole talk about climate change, it's a luxury for the, let's say, richer countries, and your customers are primarily in the European Union. Is carbon footprinting, is the whole process of going through climate strategies for corporates, is this a global applicable business already, or is it going to be for the next future more a rich country sort of exercise?
Yeah, good question. I mean, at the moment, we are focusing on the rich countries, let's say, but it could also be Japan and US, so it's not like only focus on Europe, but of course here the regulation starts, so the pressure on the market starts, yeah, and that is also, of course, something like you need to focus on where the market is, huh? Especially when you're a startup, and want to survive the next 2 years. Yeah, so I would say, I mean, you always start where the market is, and what my hope is, that we develop solutions that then will get transported into the other countries already. And so maybe that way don't make the same mistakes that we did in what means mistakes. I mean, 50 years ago it wasn't a mistake. Now we look back and think it was. Yeah, so it's always easy to judge nowadays. But that way kind of apply new technologies that are better and take less resources, and maybe have the idea of a circular economy easier from the start, because that's the thing, we need to change systems, and it's always easier to set up a new system than to change the existing one. And there's always people are employed by car manufacturers. Should we really improve the public transportation so much? Yeah, I mean, that's the question, yeah. And because there are so many people employed in this area. And yeah, and I think this is something that is what I sometimes think is also very difficult from a policy kind of view, to see, okay, can we really reach these goals in a way like that would be, so there are so many different things you need to take into account. Huh? And yeah, but I think that also sometimes the knowledge of the possibilities are missing if you just talk to the large companies from the policymakers.
I would like to open it up a bit to the audience now as well. I think we've covered a lot of ground already, be it on the regulatory side, on corporate culture, on the startup interaction. Are there any questions in the audience regarding innovation and the trajectory that innovation can take, that we can pose to our panelists here?
I think with Peter we talked about the innovation mission to spend, I think, 30 billion a year since Paris on climate or energy innovations, and very little money arrived at startup companies. And maybe your views of how that should be organized, such that actually small enterprises, startups will get the money.
I mean, I can maybe comment.
We applied for Horizon funding, for example, and we'll never do that again. That is, yeah, and yeah, this is also the problem. You have all these very high bureaucracy thresholds to get the money, and you need to have a proper plan that you present them for the next 3 years. But when you start, you are not knowing what you're doing the next year. So how could you set up a plan? So you have to fake a plan to apply for funding. Yeah, this is how the reality is. And so this is, I think, one of the major problems, that this bureaucracy really makes it difficult to get the money where it's needed. And I think we need other measurements, like maybe more like co-investing or something like this, that somebody else evaluates it and takes the risk with the governments. No? So, but yeah, there might be also other.
So the Yozma program in Israel worked that for every shekel Israeli puts in, the Americans put in a shekel. The Americans take their money back after the Israelis get their money back. So it's the first loss protection up to 50%. And the Israeli can buy out the American at 3% return. Very simple approach. Worked also in Silicon Valley, worked in Israel, was proposed to the Social Democratic finance minister. He thought that was unfair because it makes the rich people richer. It doesn't. So if you had some arguments to convince our future chancellor, we want to give him why that's a good idea.
Let him invite him to the next panel.
Yeah, exactly. We'll work on that in the panel. No, I mean, the other comment I would make is that I think, I mean, governments have two ways here that they can support startups. I think direct finance is one way, where I would question a bit the wisdom if it always has to be direct investment. I think we've seen some good programs in the European Union where you do fund-of-fund investments, for example, and really seeded a much more diverse ecosystem of venture funding, which has definitely boosted the sector in the last couple of years. I mean, just today we've seen the announcement of another World Fund, 350 million, focused on impact and climate. So these announcements have come almost every month now this year. And the other one is, I would go back to this point about the proper regulatory and policy environment. At the end of the day, if a business case is in the money, then you can survive as a startup. Like Nadine was saying, as a startup, you are looking at your cash flow and your cash wall, and that's your primary yardstick. Now, if you improve regulation and open up more sectors to new disruptive business models, you let startups then do the work. And I think that is as important as any sort of direct or indirect form of finance that can flow into startups.
this is also what I think. Like, policymakers have to be also more risk-taking. So if they create a problem, I think it will get solved. But they don't have that mindset. They ask if they can create that problem for the companies. And I think if they do that, there will be a solution.
Maybe it's also something with the German or European mindset of avoiding risk. In the US, if you fail, you learn from it and you get up again. Here, you have the thing that you failed. I don't know how to change that, but I think this is what we would have to tackle, a culture where failing is part of the program. And when you listen to one of our old engineers that worked on the Prius is a history of failure. It started that they didn't know how to get the car going. And through the failure they learned. But this is something I think, this spirit, I don't know how the Americans managed to do it, or the Israeli as well, because I was also just the other day talking to an Israeli company. There is much more, let's try it, if we fail, okay, then we learn out of it and we move to the next one. And this we don't have here.
Thank you, too. Just one comment, because I think what Nadine just said and what you complimented on, I think it's measurable. We happen to have been at the release of the Global Energy Innovation Report by ITIF. It's a US foundation who do this, as we know, most comprehensive overview of how companies perform in energy innovation. And a large barrier in the European countries, particularly in Germany, is bureaucracy. Because you don't get the startups rolling. As you just said, you applied for, what was it, Horizon 2020?
Horizon 20,
it's
some 20.
You need a consultant to get your paperwork done.
We've had one person doing it for 3 months, almost full time.
So how is that supposed to work? And this is what these guys from ITIF, they can like confirm, they can prove it through statistics. So these are, I think, this was a very good point.
My question is, this panel is called Breakthrough Innovations, and we are talking about incremental changing of the existing industry, getting greener, less carbon. But how do we really identify and push breakthrough innovations? Let it be in medicine, in chemistry, in building. I think that there are a lot of innovations around, in already existing, never see the light of the day, because the existing industry are not really interested in having a new competitor. So really, how do we get breakthrough innovations and not only changing things incrementally?
I think maybe there's a mental model we need to be careful with, looking for the big shot, for the big one shot. I'm not sure if this is going to be successful. So if I look going forward, we need tons of different technologies. We need tons of different companies with tons of different mindsets. So, but by default, a corporate as well as policymakers, they're looking for the big shot because they want to bet their coin somewhere, and still they don't have the knowledge for it. So the problem is a bit. What they change in the energy world is they now build some laboratories, so some parts of municipalities where they test and learn, and where they accept that because there's some sunk money in. But even their different partners are in the game, and you need to accept maybe the wrong ones. But the thing is, as money is short in corporates, as money is short in policymakers, we need to ask the question a bit differently: is who is it who can moderate this process of all those partners in the game? I don't have the answer, honestly. If I would, I'd likely be somewhere else today. But that's the key thing we need to track, because the intelligence is spread across so many people and faculties. We need to find a way to surface this, and accept that there is a shared, there are shared profits, and not the one shot for one.
Yeah. I think everyone in this room would agree with you. We need tremendous change to really tackle the challenges, particularly if you watched last night the news and you saw the climate is likely to be 2.5, 3 degrees instead of the 1.5 what we agreed on. But there's one problem. Within this room, this knowledge is there. If you live in a small town out there, how do we take society with us? I think this is the bigger challenge. Because we all know we should drive less and all that. I live here in a small Eiffel town. People still go to the bakery with their Mercedes S-Class just to show the neighbor I made it. This mindset has to change. But how do you do that? And this is the bigger challenge, because I agree, we have to take that step by step, because otherwise you will have people running on the street, as they do in France, where things are changing. Also here, let's see how energy prices go up. So even if we all agree on the same fundamental drastic change and technology would maybe give us, it has to be affordable. And this is one thing we really, as industry, have obligation to make sure we secure employment. So it cannot be that disruptive, that people on the street. Secondly, that it's still also affordable for the normal worker to take them with us. And how?
Maybe Andy, just to add on this, in City of Essen is a bit larger. What we did, we built a digital twin of Essen, and we modeled a bit how would it look like if this city would be completely green. What turned out is the problem is in the heating sector, not so much in the pure power one. Now what turned out is the heat is there most intensive where rather the poorer people live. Now what then turns out is this is a policymaker game, because someone needs to pay the bill. And obviously the rather poor people, they can't pay that bill. So now how you take them along? And you can nicely talk about 100 years and the planet's going to be fine, but they live today. Today the policymaker is limiting their income on a monthly basis. So we don't have the answer there. But this is actually what turns out the issue is. So to say.
Actually, Al Gore proposed the answer in 1993, and 28 Nobel Prize winners and 2,000 economists are proposing it today, which is to charge a full price on carbon, 700 euros a ton, and to take the tax and distribute it per capita.
Yeah.
So on average, if I have an average consumption, I have enough money. If I'm less consuming per person, I get 500 euros per person per month in income in my 4-person family. And if I want to drive like Mr. Merz, 2 private jets, but I'm middle class, then I pay a bit more. So that exists. It's a myth that climate action is bad for the poor people. It is a policy that's straightforward. It's available today. The FDP has it in their Wahlprogramm. Mr. Scholz likes it. The Greens like it. So thumbs pressed. We will have a Klimadividende, and then it becomes very obvious that we just switch right away.
But we have to do this globally.
And the carbon price has to be a little bit higher, maybe also.
Price has to go to 700 minimum, yes.
Yeah.
Umweltbundesamt estimates that the externality of a ton of CO2 is 700 euros a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
We have to do that in Nigeria as well as in Germany.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
no problem, because the Germans buy it at 200 or something.
No.
700.
Now still the challenge that remains is where to put the money. Now what you're saying is you get the money in. That doesn't solve the problem. It's cracking the nut where you put the money on. That just means you have enough money in the system which you can distribute. Still, if you live in a dense city, maybe Essen, Düsseldorf, Berlin, the answer is still there. Which technology for which you just open up the street? And who is doing this? And still this, let's say, allocation mechanism and which kind of technology is used where? It's still a game of many people at stake. So what you're saying is, and I can't judge because I don't know those studies, is money is there. Now, that comes to a second order issue is where to put it and how to make sure it works. And that's, I'm not sure if that is so easily solved, because it brings us back to corporates and startups.
Any final question in the audience? Very good. I think we've almost exhausted our time. It seems we've converged on this theme that we need sort of incremental change at the society level, that we can implement radical change at the technological level or at other dimensions to bring us all forward. Thank you very much to the audience and to our distinguished panelists for participating in this debate. I wish you all a great day here in Remscheid. I think we have another panel starting in about 30 minutes, so you should have enough time to walk over to the other venue, and we hopefully see you all around throughout the day and the evening here. Thank you very much. Genau, also du machst hier.
Ich mache von Deutschland aus, mein Standort ist Berlin, aber ich mache dann hier Gesamtafrika.